So now we're moving to the second part of our program where we'll be inviting a symposium, and the title of the symposium is Language Matters, Dialogue McGill Supported Initiatives. So we have 5 speakers, and they'll talk about the different initiatives that they've been leading. And then some of them are really to understand and facilitate the recruitment and retention of healthcare professionals and health services. So this symposium is really focusing on one of 3 programs that Dialogue McGill is leading, and it is the recruitment and retention program. We will definitely tomorrow discuss in more depth what Dialogue McGill programs are about, and Jackie Vachon is going to do that presentation tomorrow. And so after the symposium presentation right now, we'll have a 15-minute discussion with the panel, and we'll have questions. You can submit your question just like you did in the chat, and Jackie will read them. So the first speaker in this symposium is Dr. Tyler Brown, and he's a McGill postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Oncology. He completed his doctorate in counseling psychology at McGill University, and he did a year-long clinical psychology residency at the MUHC, the McGill University Health Center. Today, he's presenting a new Dialogue McGill retention study that seeks to inform the recruitment and retention of graduating university students. So the presentation title is Key Psychosocial Predictors of Student Retention Post-Graduation, and this is in Quebec. So welcome, Tyler.
Hi, Carmen. Thanks for that introduction. And hello, everyone. So again, my name's Tyler Brown. As Carmen mentioned, I'm a psychologist as well as a postdoctoral fellow with McGill's Department of Oncology. I work under the supervision of Dr. Loisel, with my main research interests revolving around serious illness, psycho-oncology, and end-of-life care. And more recently, I've become interested in the intersection between language and health services. And accordingly, the project that or initiative I'm going to be presenting to is largely a reflection of that interest. So this project's been carried out by myself, Marika Monarch, Andrew Durant, and Dr. Carmen Loisel. And the project, as the title suggests, focuses on key psychosocial predictors of student retention. So just as a couple points of clarification, when I say student in this presentation, I'm typically referring to Anglophone students in Quebec enrolled in healthcare social service programs. And when I say care services or care professionals, I'm referring to both healthcare and social service professionals. Okay. I don't know. Are my slides currently up?
Now they are.
Perfect. Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, we'll just go next slide from there. So as an entry point into this talk, Harvard psychology professor Steven Pinker describes language as satisfying a deep human need to explain. And arguably, we might say that nowhere is this deep need more critical than in the relationship between care recipients and care providers. And one reason for this is that effective communication plays a key role in care services, care service quality, but also in care service outcomes. And for example, research has linked ineffective communication to adverse care service outcomes. For example, inaccurate diagnoses, inaccurate treatment recommendations, and life-threatening risks in emergency situations. And so consequently, language can be construed as a crucial factor in care services. Next slide, please. And if we consider a Quebec context regarding language, approximately 95% of Quebecers can speak French at a conversational level, while only about 50% can speak English at the same level. And so although the vast majority of Quebec's Anglophones can speak conversational French, the lack of professionals able to deliver English services is still a problem, as one's mother tongue is the most effective means of communication. And as everyone can probably imagine, this is especially the case when it's discussing important matters related to health or well-being. And so this lack of professionals able to, to deliver English services may contribute to the finding that 31.5% of Quebec Anglophones report low satisfaction with English services. And next slide, please. So relatedly, the COVID-19 pandemic may exacerbate these problems linked to English services. And as we all know, the pandemic is responsible for a vast array of multidimensional service challenges, and the bulk of these challenges, by and large, have placed additional role strain on care professionals. Recent research shows that adverse mental health symptomatology, including psychological distress, have increased among care professionals during the pandemic. And also in one recent study, 21% of health faculty, trainees, and staff reported that they considered leaving the workforce, while 30% reported considering reducing their work hours significantly. And therefore, lack of professionals to deliver English services in Quebec, paired with the emergence of a vulnerable workforce due to the pandemic, does appear to increase the need for better professional retention in Quebec. Next slide, please. So here I've attached this quote because I think it highlights the value of building workforce capacity in response to the pandemic. So the quote reads, "The COVID-19 pandemic is a timely reminder that our health system is only as strong as its workforce." Next slide. And so conceivably, one means of achieving a stronger workforce might be to include retaining graduates from professional programs in Quebec who can deliver English services. For example, McGill University has speakers from Quebec, or English speakers from Quebec and worldwide, who could be retained after graduation to provide English services to underserved regions in Quebec. Unfortunately, English speakers are leaving Quebec with one study finding that 26% intended to leave. I believe this 26% was data from a CGEP focusing on Quebec-born Anglophones. Next slide, please. And so that brings us to the question of why are Anglophone students leaving Quebec? And so two recent studies sought to identify motivations behind this. And Crossland and Brown found that language difficulties was the #1 reason for leaving, while employment opportunities outside of Quebec was the #2 reason. And Boris and Sufi found that Anglophone students are more willing to leave Quebec compared to Francophone students, with the reasons for leaving including language-based discrimination, employment opportunities, and as well as linguistic tensions. And so while these two studies offer key insights into some of the motivations for Anglophones leaving, they don't specifically focus on students in health or social service programs. And furthermore, Dr. Boris's study focuses on Quebec-born Anglophones exclusively. So we don't have data on international or out-of-province students and their motivations for leaving Quebec. Next slide, please. And so in response to these gaps in the literature, we're presently conducting a comprehensive statistical model of what we're calling key determinants associated with students' postgraduate retention. And again, we're specifically focusing on students in health and social service programs who are both Quebec-born, out of province, and international. And specifically, we're exploring the various factors. We're exploring various factors to better understand the complex nature of Anglophone retention potential in Quebec. Next slide, please. So in the study that we're currently conducting, we're using a quantitative statistical approach. And so using a statistical package, we've determined that we would need to base our study on a sample of 216 Anglophone students. Our inclusion criteria for this study, just in terms of the specifics of the participants that we're looking to recruit, include residing in Quebec during the duration of their studies, enrolled in a McGill University program that leads to care professional practice, essentially being able to be licensed in a care profession, and with the third inclusion criteria being identifying English as one's preferred language. To recruit the participants in the study, we're using social media, we're using listservs, listservs specifically in the context of university departments and programs, and then we're using newsletters as well. And then regarding data collection, we're collecting online surveys via the Qualtrics platform. And next slide, please. So in our study, again, we're just outlining the variables that we're focusing on. So in our study, of course, our main outcome variable is likelihood of remaining in Quebec after graduation. And more specifically, we're looking at 3 different time intervals. So we're looking at 1 year post-graduation, 5 years post-graduation, and 10 years post-graduation. And we're looking at these varied time intervals just to have sort of a broader view of retention in Quebec. And then also we're exploring 5 main predictive variables, and they include demographic characteristics, previously identified retention factors. So there was a study in 2017 that identified a whole cluster of retention factors. And so we're looking to see if those factors also predict retention in health and social service students in Quebec, or Anglophone health and social service students in Quebec. We're also looking at language-based factors, social and cultural integration, and then also a variable called psychological burnout. Next slide, please. And so here, displayed in our predictive model, we're using what's referred to as hierarchical regression model to predict retention. So we're using this framework first to see if demographic characteristics contribute to retention. And then we're proceeding on through the model to see if additional variables contribute additional predictive power to the model. So we're again starting with demographics, moving to cluster of previously identified retention factors, and then language, and then so on and so forth. But the key focus of this diagram here is to show you that we're looking at these predictive factors in the context of steps. So demographics individually, and then we're moving on and looking at each subsequent factor to see if it adds additional predictive power to the model. Next slide, please. And so regarding the status of our study, so of course, at this point, we've received ethics approval. We are in the process of collecting data, and currently we've collected data on 69 participants of the total 216 sample size. We're estimating that we should conclude data collection by September of 2022. And then immediately after, we would begin our data analysis, which we probably estimate to take from probably about anywhere from 3 weeks to 6 weeks. And after completing data analysis, then we would move on to preparing our manuscripts, which we would hope to complete around somewhere in the fall of 2022. Next slide, please. And so regarding implications, so we intend that the results of our study will offer numerous benefits. And the main benefit that we hope will come out of this study, and we imagine will come out of this study, is we'll gain additional insights into the retention motivations among health and social service students. And in building on these insights, or using these insights, we hope to inform incentives and programs to foster or aid retention. And in as well, in doing so, we hope to advance health and well-being among individuals in need of English services in underserved areas within Quebec. And, next slide, please. And then lastly, I'd like to acknowledge the support of Dialogue McGill, Health Canada, and the Christine and Herschel Victor Hope and Cope Research Chair in Psychosocial Oncology held by Dr. Louisel. That concludes my portion of the symposium here, and I'd just like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tyler. I'm very eager to see what questions will come up, so we will wait at the end of the symposium for those questions. Now, I would like to introduce Gail Halley-McDonald and Richard Silvers and their presentation. By the way, both are senior advisors with Dialogue McGill. Gail was coordinator and information officer for English services in the Conseil régional de santé et des services sociaux de l'Outaouais. She has served as a senior program officer for quality and a project officer for Dialogue McGill. Richard is trained in social work and law. He practiced as a lawyer and was an attaché politique with Quebec's Minister de la Santé et des Services Sociaux. He has also 16 years of experience with the Ordre des Travailleurs Sociaux et des Thérapeutes Conjugaux et Familiaux, and has served on several professional boards and directors. So today, their joint presentation is on community networks and weathering the pandemic. So Gail and Richard, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I just had to get my mic on there. Thanks for the introduction, Carmen. It's a pleasure for Richard and myself to be invited to present in the Language Matters Dialogue McGill Supported Initiative Symposium. And our presentation is Community Networks and Weathering the Pandemic. It's interesting, I haven't been able to see any of the slides, so I'll just say that right away. And is there a slide up? We just have 2 slides in our presentation today, and one is the title slide, and the second is the outline of our presentation. So Jonathan, can you put up the slide on our presentation, please?
Absolutely,
the outline?
they're being shared right now.
Okay, thank you very much. So today, the presentation, as you can see, is covering the various elements of the retention program and essentially how the community networks fit into it. I'll be presenting the first 2 points, which are a general overview of the retention program, then the community networks and their contribution to retention through the McGill project, and then the 5 dimensions that the community networks are active in, and Richard will present the last 4, which is the impact of COVID on the activities of community networks, how they've adapted and are faring through it all, and then he'll wrap up with the conclusion. So the retention program, as Dr. Loisel said, is one of 3 programs or measures of the larger Dialogue McGill project, those being language training, retention, and research. As we know, particularly through what Tyler has told us, English-speaking health and social services professionals are underrepresented in all regions of Quebec, which essentially helps to contribute to the difficulty of accessing services in English. For more than 15 years, Dialogue McGill has been committed to addressing that shortage through the retention program. It's a program designed to give Quebec Health and Social Services institutions access to a larger pool of graduates capable of providing services in both French and English, and particularly to outlying areas. The project has selected retention initiatives and support measures among a range of interventions that have been recommended by the World Health Organization for addressing retention issues in remote areas. As the WHO has pointed out, results cannot be reached by relying solely on one initiative or one partner. Recourse to a combination of measures is essential to improving regional retention of health professionals. And so for this reason, the retention program has two major funding components, one targeting community networks and the other educational institutions. As the title of our presentation suggests, Rich and I will cover community networks and their role. Community networks are part of the networking and partnership initiative of the Community Health and Social Services Network, CHSSN, where they receive their core funding. As community capacity builders, they're an integral part of the Health Canada strategy to support access to health and social services in English in Quebec. And they saw their emergence at the same time as Dialogue McGill. Why were community networks chosen to be part of the Dialogue McGill project and retention specifically? Well, they are the closest partner to the end stakeholder, the English community. Firmly rooted in their communities, networks know their needs, their strengths and their weaknesses, their resources, including their human capital. And they represent the community at the institutional level as well. They have strong connections to the education sector, which of course is an important player on the regional scene when it comes to youth retention. Dialogue McGill provides a small annual envelope of $14,300 to each network to carry out a number of activities intended to intervene early, or as we would say in French, agir en amont, in the educational trajectory of students, with the purpose of influencing and supporting career choices in the field of health and social services. Currently, there are 23 networks in 16 of the 18 administrative regions of Quebec receiving funding through the retention program. Through their 5-year projects, networks receive funds to carry out activities in 5 different dimensions. The first is promotion of careers in health and social services to secondary school students. 21 of the 23 funded networks are active in this area, offering, often intervening as early as secondary 3. Activities include career fairs, health career panels and kiosks, chat groups that connect health professionals with interested students, and job shadowing activities, all designed to entice them into careers in health. The second is development and maintenance of student data banks. Here we have 15 networks participating. Through this component, community networks develop and maintain data banks to track English speaking youth identified as being interested in or even pursuing studies in the field of health and social services. And this can be from the very expression of interest in a field through to the termination of their studies. It enables the networks to stay connected with these students and to support them through the various stages of their educational process, up to and including job search and recruitment. The third area of activity is the administration of a service return bursary program. 18 networks receive funding to regionally administer the Health and Social Services Community Leadership Bursary Program. Here, activities that they carry out include bursary promotion, coordinating the work of a regional selection committee, evaluating applications, recommending applications to Dialogue McGill for approval, distributing funds to successful recipients, and finally tracking their progress. More than 400 bursaries have been awarded through this community-led program. For most networks, administration of the bursary program is their largest single investment of energy, and perhaps the activity which has the largest quantifiable result. The fourth area is support for internship development and interns and employment of graduates in the region, where 14 networks are active. Because this measure requires close collaboration with the human resources department of the CIS or CIUS of their areas, internship development has been challenging for some networks, and hence only about half of our networks are active in this sphere at this time. And finally, there is the fifth dimension, which is linguistic and cultural adaptation activities for healthcare and social service providers. Here, 13 networks are participating in this activity. Although this measure is not really about retention, it's directly related to the strengths and competencies of community networks and was therefore incorporated in their 5-year funding ask, with financing coming through the language training envelope. Funded networks receive monies for outreach activities that afford opportunities for French-speaking health and social services professionals to practice their language skills, their English language skills, and to expose them to the culture and history of the English community in their region. Networks are now in year 4 of their 5-year funding projects, which will end in March 2023. Years 3 and 4 have been exceptionally challenging due to the pandemic. However, they have shown amazing agility for adaptation, which of course is their inherent strength. Richard will now tell you about how our community network partners fared through the pandemic. Richard?
Thank you, Carmen, for your introduction, and thank you, Gail, for your overview of the Dialogue McGill Retention Program, the role of the community networks, and the 5 dimensions in which the community networks may be involved. I'm going to cover briefly now the impact of COVID-19 on the activities of community networks, how community networks adapted their activity, and try and draw some conclusions. It's a pleasure to see so many representatives of the networks here with us today, first of all. And I'd like to let you know that the information that we're presenting now is based on the reports that you submitted to Dialogue McGill over the course of the 2021 year and the first period of reporting for the 21-22 year, and also the conversations that Gail and I have had with you over this period. So it's quite possible that we haven't covered everything that affected you, and we'd be delighted to have your comments and questions at the end of this panel presentation. So what happened when the COVID pandemic hit us all in March 2020? Like all of us, the community networks were obliged to close their offices, start working at a distance, and try to master those technological tools that we had no knowledge about using at all at that particular point in time. At the same time as the networks were affected, their partners were also affected by the pandemic and had to respond in similar ways by closing offices and working at a distance. So we saw an effect on not only the networks, but on the public health and social service institutions with whom the networks work, and also with the educational institutions with whom the networks are also in contact. One of the major impacts of the pandemic early on in 2020 was that for a large part of the year, there was a complete stop to in-person activities. And we noticed from the reports that we got and the conversations we had with you that this had an effect on some of the activities that you had planned to introduce over the course of the year. For example, the promotion of careers in the health and social services system and the English language conversation groups that you had with people working in the health and social services system. And these were particularly dimensions 1 and 5 that Gail referred to. There was also, as you know, reduced access to the local and regional health and social service institutions in some cases. And this had implications on internships, job shadowing, mentoring, and supervision. And as a result, your activities under Dimension 4 suffered as health and social service professionals were overwhelmed during the pandemic, and many worked at a distance. But we also noticed that some of your activities were less affected than others. For example, the pandemic had little or no impact at all on the maintenance of your student data banks and the administration of the bursary program with Dialogue McGill. And we noticed that the number of bursary applications, in fact, over the course of the 2019-20 year and 2021 year was indeed quite high. So how did community networks adapt their services to the pandemic? First of all, as I mentioned, the promotion of careers in the health and social services networks required community networks to adapt their practices. It was no longer possible for community networks to hold career fairs, for example, in person in secondary and post-secondary institutions. And a number of the community networks organized virtual career fairs and sessions for students at a distance. In some cases, students made videos for the network's YouTube channel and distributed them to encourage people to take on careers in the health and social service system. In other situations, bursary recipients met with groups of students, groups of seniors at a distance by video. In other cases, community networks produced videos on different kinds of careers in the healthcare professions. We also noticed an increased use of social media across the board with the community networks. Career capsules were created in some cases. There was career promotion on Facebook and so on. And some networks organized Zoom workshops on various health issues. Some of you were able to do limited in-person activities, but only respecting the bubbles that were imposed on the educational institutions in question. In terms of your language conversation activities under Dimension 5, we saw some innovative approaches that community networks adapted to make sure that they can continue to offer these services to professionals wishing to converse and improve their English language skills. And some community networks adapted their approach to offer conversations by Zoom. In at least one case, conversation classes were organized by telephone. And in some cases, this resulted not only in higher participation, but also high volunteer involvement and increased very positive comments on the activity in question. So in conclusion, as we look at the effect that the pandemic had on you and how you were able to adjust your activities accordingly, Gail and I were impressed by the adaptability, and the creativity of community networks in responding to the effects of the pandemic in spite of limited resources. We were also struck by the importance of the communication with the person responsible for English language services within the local or regional health and social services institution, as this line of contact remained a crucial conduit for you to maintain contact with the institution. And where this was not possible, it suffered. We also noted that you were obliged to adapt and review your practices as a result of the pandemic and the use of these new technology. And in our conversations with you and in looking at your reports, we noted that some community networks will continue to operate the way that they started to during the pandemic with technological devices, or to adopt a hybrid model, which can entail the use of technology and in-person activities. So in conclusion, we noted that the community networks have confirmed their relevance to the community and this is underscored by the level of proximity with the community, which allowed the community networks to respond and adapt rapidly to ensure service delivery to the English-speaking population of their region. And these activities under the auspices of the retention program, we believe contribute to enlarging the pool of human resources to provide services in English and French in the health and social services network. And we'll be looking with interest at the result of Tyler's research study to see how this information will be useful for us in the retention program. Thank you very much. And we look forward to listening to any questions or comments you might have at the end of this symposium. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gail and Richard. It's really appreciated that you can provide real-time feedback on the impact of the pandemic for community networks. Often that line of communication is lacking when we're in reaction mode, but you were able to take stock of some of the impact and give this timely feedback to community networks. So thank you very much. So now we're going to move to our fourth presenter, his name is Jean Robert. He's a Dialogue McGill senior advisor who works closely with our CEGEP and vocational partners. Dr. Robert has a lot of experience For 35 years, he was a counselor, an academic dean, and a campus director of the Cégep Champlain St. Lawrence. He is president of the National Battlefields Commission and Jeffrey Hale Community Partners. He's also vice chairman of the Central Quebec School Board and sits on several Quebec Foundation boards. His presentation title is Community, Vocational Centers, and Cégeps Contributions to Care. So welcome, Jean.
Merci beaucoup, Carmen. Est-ce qu'on m'entend
Thank you
bien?
very much, Carmen. Can you all hear me properly? Yes, good, thank you. So I'd very much like to start by saying that for us and our program, the brief words that say better communicate to better take care of, that's our motivation more or less. What can we do to help the population, the Anglophone population, to be well served in English? Of course, education in my case and Caroline's case that will follow, that's also part of our DNA. At McGill University and from the work that I've done with the Cégeps and the professional centers, and Caroline with her work with McGill, that's our motivation to say that it's more or less the solution, education. So for us, it's a matter of working, and in my case, I work especially with the Cégep and professional centers. So what can we do to encourage our students to truly stay here in Quebec and serve either our Francophone population, but also the Anglophone population? That's more or less our goal, to retain those people in their position. I'd like to ask Jonathan to show the first slide. Next one, that's the title. So the slide I'm showing you is the project that we conducted with John Abbott College. We wanted to know those students that are in Montreal, in Cégep, are they ready to go out in suburbia? Because in the metropolitan area of Montreal, I think the problem is not as obvious. It's not a true problem. It exists. There's an Anglophone, important Anglophone population, as you know, but in suburbia, it's a bit more difficult. So we wanted to know, for those students in an Anglophone Cégep in Montreal, and also the College Champlain and Heritage in Gatineau, were they interested in going to suburbia? And out of this project with John Abbott and with the Secretariat for the Quebecers, Anglophone Quebecers, we wanted to see if there was interest. And clearly, yes, students are willing to go to suburbia. So perhaps they might want to go, those that come from suburbia tend to go to suburbia, back to suburbia, and that's more obvious. But there's also students from outside of Quebec that are ready to go to suburbia. So there is an interest, and that's quite important. So there is an interest, but it's difficult to follow those students or to get students that volunteer to go to suburbia. So that is a question that we have. The next slide. We are working with Place aux Jeunes, so place for our youth in regions. So it's a very dynamic group. I work with Quebec youth. And what we found from COVID, and what I find extremely interesting, is that in the case of Place aux Jeunes, there was an increase of those people that were interested and were starting to wonder about the possibility of going to suburbia. So you can see on the slide, there's an incredible increase of those people that were looking into that possibility, including Francophones and Anglophones. So recently I was in Sherbrooke, and there was incredible traffic. So I call one of my friends. I said, listen, it's worse than Montreal. He said, well, Jean, it's COVID. He says, what do you mean? He says, well, many people from Montreal decided to go to suburbia, and it's for work and all kinds of reasons, and are looking at going out of Montreal into suburbia. So it reminded me of Métis-sur-Mer. We call it in English Métis Beach. It was really the place where the people from Montreal, Montrealers that were wealthy enough would leave Montreal and go to Métis Beach to get away from the viruses. And they would say, well, we'll leave the city to go on the edge of the river to hold our assembly. And with many people with COVID are starting to say, well, I think I'm going to go back to nature, a smaller area, less people. So this might be a very interesting opening for us to a dialogue. We have students that are at CEGEP, at university, or in a professional center, and they are keen on going to regions. And with COVID, that is much more emphasized. So that's extremely encouraging news to us, meaning that we have students either in care, God knows we need those students, or in social services, in physiotherapy, nursing. So that's extremely interesting for me. And we have another project we call the CEMEC, is the Expertise Center for the Teaching in Quebec. And when I spoke to the people in charge, so we're talking about nursing assistant, home care, assistants, pharmaceutical assistants. So when I spoke to those people, I asked them what their needs would be.
Of all these professional centers, they said, you know, one of the major problems we have is that the written material for our teaching is not available in English. And to me, that just seemed like such a basic necessity, that you're teaching a program, and in this case, institutional and home care. We're giving this program, yet we don't have any books in English. And and without exception, every single professional center, whether it was Lester B. Pearson, Central Quebec, Lennoxville, Wilfrid Laurier, Riverside, they all said, we're giving the program, but we don't have the book. And Dialogue came out and said, well, we will help you. And we translated over 8 books. And you can imagine the cost, very expensive. However, if I look at pre-COVID and COVID, all these books are online. Every student in the program, and all of you know that during the pandemic, the government put a lot of time and energy into putting together new programs in nursing assistant or in home care, what we call préposé. And now, with our help, these books had been translated in English and were online. And the students during the pandemic were given full access online to all these books. And of course, made it much easier for them to follow their program. The government came in with a new program, 300-hour program for students to graduate, to be able to go into an intensive program and then go into the programs in our long-term facilities, long-term health facilities. And again, our books that we had translated were used by these students. What a very interesting fall through is that there's 5 books left to be translated, and the Quebec government saw the importance of this translation, and they've taken on the dossier, something that I was hoping would have been done from the beginning, but now that's very encouraging. So those are very good signs that what has happened with COVID is I guess the ministry has realized that we have to have some of these services available to our English institutions. Now, when it comes to CEGEPs, CEGEPs we have Anglophone CEGEPs throughout the province, and they give programs that are so important to our communities. Very often, the first person a patient will see is a nurse. And so we work hand in hand with John Abbott College, with Vanier College, with Heritage, with Dawson. And we work in trying to get programs that will help our population. Just to give you a couple of examples, because I know my time is running out. An example, I start with Heritage. Heritage, an Anglophone population, and you can well imagine that it's tempting for a student to cross the bridge and work in Ottawa. In some cases, better salary. In some cases, maybe the working conditions are seen as being better. So what we've done with Heritage is the students that are in nursing and special care, we're giving them extra French courses so that they feel at ease. They feel confident to work in a French environment, yet serving the English population. And that is a reality. There's a reality that is clear in Quebec, that they will probably be working in a French institution or with a very small population of Anglophone patients, but patients that, as I said, need our help more than ever. So that's a program I have with Vanier. Dawson College, pre-COVID, students in physio system program, we're working with the population in helping them with readaptive programs. And now, what the people at Dawson did is they put together videos to try to help students understand what possibilities exist in that technology, but also opening it to students throughout the province online to see how the program like that could possibly interest them. We work with Vanier College. Vanier College with the French department, where we say, the French department saying, how can we have students, Anglophone students, feel more at ease working in French? So we have them working with populations in Quebec that are Francophones. And this year, the students, because of COVID, they couldn't be in person with the community groups, but they're on the phone. And it's a phone-in program where they in French, the Anglophone students will phone up a community member, a patient, and discuss their health needs and their health concerns. So again, that's a program with Vanier that's been very popular. John Abbott College has a program we called Caravan of Health. And basically, Caravan of Health would get a group of students in the health areas to visit community groups, and in this case, Four Corners. With COVID, they were unable to visit the groups because of some of the restrictions. So they went online, and they had videos online to help their supervisors and to help the students to have a better understanding of the English community, but also to interact with that community that had some health questions. So again, some of the things that came out of COVID have been very, very promising. Things that we didn't think we would ever be able to do online, we are now doing without any difficulty. Again, these are just really an overview of some of the programs we're doing, but they're programs that are touching the Anglophone population, and really in so many ways we've been able to adapt to the pandemic in a way that has been remarkable, I have to say. And I think I'd have to end by saying that what I've come to appreciate is that for most, probably all of the institutions we work with, this is a labor of love. There's no one getting rich with these programs, but they've come to realize that it's important to serve the minority in Quebec, and for most of the institutions, and again I'd say all, they've come to realize that it's part of their mission. It's part of what they should be doing, and it's what is, if there's anything that we've come to appreciate together, is that this is something that will help and benefit our Anglophone population, but also our Francophone population. So the most encouraging thing I'd say in conclusion is that our graduates in our programs in whether it's health, whether it's at the vocational centers or in the CEGEPs, and Carolyn will talk about our universities, they're more and more bilingual. Our students are more at ease working in both languages than ever. And that's very encouraging. It's very encouraging. And I think as we look to the future, it's encouraging to know that students, whether they're in Anglophone CEGEPs or at Francophone CEGEPs, have come to feel more at ease in their second language, and I guess to the benefit of the entire population. So that's it for my presentation, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Jean. This was very stimulating, as always, very invigorating. So we have one last speaker before we start having the panel discussion with you all. So I'm going to introduce now Professor Carolyn Storr. So she's a Dialogue McGill senior advisor who works closely with our university, as Jean was saying. And she chairs our professional schools committees. So for 40 years, Professor Storr has worked as an occupational therapist and currently sits on the board of directors for the West Island Health Authority in Quebec and the Rehabilitation Advisory Committee for the West Central Health Authority. She is an associate professor at McGill University and is this year's recipient of Outstanding Occupational Therapist of the Year Award, which was given by the Quebec's chapter of the Canadian Association of Occupational Therapists. So congratulations, Carolyn, for this award. And the title of her presentation is Educational Initiatives Enhancing the Care Pipeline. So welcome, Carolyn.
Merci, Carmen. Et bonjour à tous. So I have, can everyone hear me? Do I have a good sound? Oh, thank you.
Very good sound, yes.
Great. Okay, excellent. So as outlined, I have the distinct pleasure of cherry picking 8 funded projects. Could I have the slides, please, Jonathan? Thank you. Sorry. Excellent. I'll just wait till they're up. Excellent, great. So I have the distinct pleasure of sharing in the next few minutes with you 8 cherry-picked projects that have been funded or are currently new funding initiatives, really looking at enhancing and building on the training and creation of bilingual healthcare professionals who we do hope to keep here in the province of Quebec. So at McGill, we're a rich breeding ground, I would say, for this type of creativity because we have a number of different professional schools. So that includes nursing, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, speech and language pathology. We have nutrition in the Faculty of Agriculture, and we also have social work. Of course, we have dentistry and we have medicine programs. We have programs in psychology, in educational counseling. So we have a number of different avenues of training potential and opportunities to try and keep these prospective graduates here in the province. Next slide, please. Thank you. So of course, all of these projects have been funded by Health Canada. Next slide, please. So a very interesting program it's called the PT Equivalency Program. So this was a funded program targeting foreign trained physical therapists who have immigrated to Quebec in hopes of practicing. Because of regulatory requirements, they have to undergo further training. For most of these foreign trained PTs, their mother tongue was something other than English and French. English was their second language, and probably not at a fluent level, with minimal French for most of these students. So the entrance portal to practice was mandating them to go through a French university. So one can see that the length of time to learn French, then enter the equivalency program, and then graduate and be eligible for licensure, created a very extended timeline. So this particular project was funded with seed money to get it growing and expand the course offerings so that the equivalency training programs could be done at McGill, which has English language of instruction. So students could be working simultaneously, developing their French language skills through language training, but at the same time doing their required equivalency courses so that they would be eligible for licensure and practice, contributing to the manpower capital here in the province of Quebec. This program has continued to expand now that the dialogue funding stopped, because as I mentioned, it was seed money to get it started. And it's actually been taken over and is funded by Immigration Canada, and the program's expanded. So a successful example in terms of increasing manpower capacity. Next slide, please. And so another past example of funding, here in our Ingram School of Nursing, there was a peer mentoring program, and one of the components of this student-led peer mentoring program had a language retention objective. So students would coach and create mentoring opportunities for fellow students so that they could practice and develop French language fluency. Because coming back to some of the earlier discussions, many of the students admitted into these programs come from more English backgrounds, and there was studies indicated anxiety in terms of going to do their internships, and of course, then prospective hiring into more unilingual francophone mandated merged institutions. So those are types of institutions that do not have a bilingual mandate. This enabled, again, to keep students here, making them feel more comfortable in French. Next slide, please. Another past funded initiative has been the creation of 3 different types of platforms that trains supervisors. So an interprofessional type of supervisor training model that, interestingly enough, beat the global pandemic because it was all online to enable access to supervisors, so that could be clinicians in all of the professions I previously described, to become ready to welcome and train students in their particular practice areas. So one was a series of 5 courses in English. Another was a series of very short TED-style talks. And the third was actually a platform that was developed in French, a series of 8 modules, so it could appeal to Francophone clinicians who might be interested in welcoming bilingual students to their specific practice area. And so these modules are open access. They are available to prospective supervisors. Next slide, please. Next, thank you. Okay, and then an ongoing initiative that has been funded and continues to be funded are here at McGill in our French Language Center. We have a series of 7 different targeted French courses for all the students in the healthcare disciplines that are training here at McGill. Variety of levels. The majority of these courses focus at the beginner, intermediate, or advanced intermediate levels. They focus on oral and written skills. Some are for credit, some are not for credit, which is a great mix offering for students, because the students involved in our professional programs have highly charged, highly sequenced programs that do not permit language options. So for a student coming in who would like to further develop their French language skills so that they can effectively practice in the province, to do this while they're enrolled in a program of study had prior to these courses been extremely difficult. These kinds of courses enable the uptake and development of French language competency for our graduates to practice effectively here in the province of Quebec. An additional sort of value-added activity that the French Language Center added were these customized workshops by practice discipline to help students prepare for the OQLF exam, which is required for licensure in a professional order here in the province of Quebec. And that's been a very successful piece. COVID impacted these courses because one of the challenges in in-person course delivery was that students could be out on internships, need to come back to the university to participate in a language course. With COVID, when we flipped basically overnight into virtual delivery online course format, we saw a dramatic increase in course enrollment because students from their home in their pajamas after internships could register and participate in these courses, and they transitioned very nicely. Next slide, please. Thank you. Another ongoing initiative are student internship funding support. So these kinds of internship collaborations are discipline-led, meaning they function at the university or they could function at the CEGEP level. There's usually a clinical coordinator who liaises with institutional teaching sites to arrange internships. Over the past number of years, where possible, if a student's identified who might come from a more remote or rural area of Quebec that has an English community network group, collaborations, partnerships were tried to get students to do an internship in their home region, knowing that the evidence indicates that students where they train is often where they'll end up working. There are certain jurisdictional issues related to this because the different universities in the province of Quebec oversee the quality and training of the different territories of the regions. So these are some of the inherent problems in terms of setting up these internships, but we do have maximal funding per internship for students, and these are put in and coordinated by the program coordinator of $5,000. There's a parallel type of program that helps support a supervisor, and there can be a stipend of $5,000 paid to a supervisor, because often what we find when we're arranging internship, there's a willing site, there's a willing student, but there isn't a supervisor. And all of the students require a licensed supervisor in order to meet accreditation guidelines. So this kind of funding's enabled some very interesting types of projects. Some examples have been hiring a supervisor to work at the NDG Food Bank, a nutrition-based project, or there's another project at the Kanawaki Educational Center over on the South Shore in Montérégie West Territory, again, to hire a supervisor over there and to help students with participating in internships like that. Next slide, please. Another fairly new initiative that was started in 2016 was a targeted bursary program, and speech language pathology students, of which here at McGill, it's the only English training in speech and language services that happens in the province of Quebec. It's a fairly small class, about 27 students in the cohort each year. But this targeted bursary is offered to Quebec resident students who want to stay here and practice in Quebec. This was designed because there was a critical shortage of speech language pathologists trained to offer speech intervention to English speaking individuals. So it could be children with diverse developmental language delays. It could be adults suffering from aphasia, broad spectrum of interaction, acute need. And this program to date's awarded 17 bursaries and effectively retained all of these winners into staying here to practice in the province of Quebec. These sort of targeted bursary programs, the way they're set up, for each year of bursary, there has to be a year of service. Next slide, please. Another initiative, which is fairly newly funded, here at McGill within the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences, there is like the whole campus actually, there is a very strong equity and diversity initiative taken place through our Social Accountability and Community Engagement Office. There are different student-led pipeline recruitment activities that target students in high schools and CEGEPs that offer, it used to offer in-person workshops on career development to excite potential students to enter and apply into careers in health and social services. The mandate of these student-led groups that offer these pipeline recruitment activities has increased to include some partnerships with some of the English Community Network groups, also with rural areas as well. And obviously it's catering to Anglophone communities. So it's it crosses a number of sectors, these kinds of activities. The first Explore, it's a summer camp that's offered. Of course, this had to adapt to a virtual format with COVID. The next, Academic Immersion in Medicine, caters to career training events, workshops, similarly as the Health Outreach Project does. And a newly started student group is actively engaging in mentorship. So students who've engaged in an initial pathway project who then seem to be interested in applying, they'll hook up with a student here at McGill enrolled in a program and help guide them and steward them into successful application and then in their early years of a program. So the COVID's actually helped to expand this program because many of the activities have been able to be delivered in a virtual format, which was challenging before when it was in person because the students leading the activities have very busy, charged semesters with course loads. Next slide, please. Okay, and the last initiative I want to share is a very new one, which is really COVID inspired. And this is trying to create what happened since we all know is the pandemic. Health and social service care transitioned where possible to online service delivery. I'm sure many of you saw, if you wanted to see your physician, you went to a telehealth or a telephone type of visit. Well, in the rehab sector, rehab meaning occupational therapy, physical therapy, and speech and language, many of those types of services shut down, resources focused on COVID-19 related care. So the private sector, where a lot of rehab, outpatient rehab is delivered, transitioned very quickly to online service delivery. Clinicians, after being surveyed, many felt they needed to further their knowledge in this channel of service delivery. So it didn't mean to eradicate in-person care, but rather it's an additional tool in the arsenal to promote access to rehab services. So our goal is to create a knowledge hub in the form of a website that will be a training vehicle for all rehab professionals in the province of Quebec, a bilingual website that will have best practice guidelines, best regulatory advice. It'll have training modules to up the knowledge for better service delivery, create network accesses, and we're very excited about this project. And I think just to share a little tidbit of why this promises to be, I think, very innovative. One of our private clinic advisory partners has just signed an agreement based here in Montreal. They've signed an agreement with the Suisse-Côte-Nord to offer remote PT services in Blanc-Sablon. So this is an area that has never been able to recruit PT clinicians, and a project like this will enable this kind of access. So I'm done. Thank you very much. And well, thank you for listening, and we welcome questions.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. This was also very stimulating. I think all of you, all the panelists showed that, you know, what was a very challenging situation with the pandemic could be turned into opportunities for further language training, retention, recruitment. So these are really great examples, and thank you for all panelists. Now we have, what, maybe 6-7 minutes for discussion among panelists or questions from the audience. I don't know if you want to start with a few observations across or what it's like for you all to work together. I think it's a really, really neat group of people working at Dialogue and working with community networks to really make projects that do contribute and make a difference. So Jean, you're kind of popping up here on the screen. You want to say something about the kind of working relationship that has happened across the panelists and how stimulating this is?
Thank you. I didn't know I was jumping up, but I'm more than happy to say a few words. Certainly, again, the pandemic was harder for when you have a group of people that are in the field because they like to interact with other people and very often physically be with them. So as a team, we had to adapt also and to have all our meetings online. And more importantly, as a team, we had new leadership. Carmen, Jacqueline, it was a completely new group. And we had an opportunity to finally meet together and meet each other a month ago. And we missed that. We missed that contact. And it's the same with, the contact we have with our partners, whether it's with community groups, with students, with universities. It really is nice that slowly we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, but we were able to adapt, and our concern was always to support our partners through this difficult time. And as we look at the results, we feel very encouraged that people did adapt. And again, as I said in conclusion, it is a labor of love. And people are in it for the right reasons. They want to serve a population that is sometimes having to go through a difficult reality, whether they're in a small area of Quebec where very little English is spoken, or whether it's in another area where again the services in the very specialized areas are difficult. But as I said earlier, it's encouraging. So that's what I would say from my point, and certainly my colleagues, I'd be more than happy. And again, nos partenaires francophones, on travaille avec nos partenaires.
Again, our English partners, we work with them for the well-being of both English speakers and French speakers alike. Thank you, Jean. Anyone else amongst our panelists who wants to share anything?
I'd like to say a couple of words about, in response to your question, like, what has it been like working with community networks? Well, I feel like I'm pretty well placed to comment on that, because when I first came to Dialogue McGill, first 6 years perhaps was Dialogue McGill, I was working on Measure 1, which was the language training program. And of course, to me, that was the only thing that was important at the time. And, I always was informed about the community network component a little bit, but it wasn't until I actually got involved in the working right in Measure 2, and specifically with community networks, that I got to see how very important their role is in the retention program and actually support for the entire program, because they are so connected with their region. They're so engaged in the issue of access to health and social services, and have it's been an absolute pleasure working with them. And I'm just, my hope is that they become an even more important component of our program as we go into the next phase, and that we can actually develop some evaluation tools that will help us and help them to more clearly show the impact of their work.
Thank you. Thank you. We have an interesting comment from Dr. Justin Sanders. And this is to the panel, but specifically probably to Jean or others that have thought about it. So the comment is, anytime there's a project to do with the right thing, anytime a project is to do the right thing is a labor of love, he worries that it's a sign that we have much more work to do to institutionalize it. So relying on the goodwill and on the motivation of key players, and that's what Jean described as a labor of love. But how do we make sure that that becomes a priority across institutions, across government, so that we are supported beyond the labor of love? So someone wants to take that comment on?
Well, I could say one thing that I've seen is that, in fact, in some of the institutions, it's almost become part of their strategic plan to serve, and it wasn't always that way. And even some of the CEGEPs now are looking at their incoming students and saying, how could these incoming students coming to us from different regions of Quebec, how could they serve Quebec by possibly going back to their region? So I'm seeing that at an institutional level. I gave the example earlier of the Quebec government now subsidizing the translation of volumes in the new program in institutional care. I would think that would become, hopefully, just normal, and the fact that they're going to invest probably I'm guessing a few $100,000 in translating the remaining volumes are to me interesting. But it is a good point. I mean, our resources are not have limits, and that's the reason why I bring up the labor of love, because if an institution gets $15,000 to do some of the things I've mentioned, it's not that much, but that's what's available at this point.
Thank you. And Carolyn.
I was just going to add to that. I think to play a coin on words, I think the increased dialogue that is sharing. So at the level of the government, for example, what the pandemic has done, it's created an acute, critical shortage of manpower resources across all domains. So knowing what those numbers are and where the gaps are, partnering with the community organizations and the different training programs, instead of everyone working in their respective silos. While, I mean, you can cost that out, but ensuring that there's good communication, I think that's how we're going to institutionalize it and fill these gaps. So I think it's really talking and knowing what it is that's out there. So we're not all, like if we look at the English community networks with a big profile of their career days in high schools, I'm very optimistic and hopeful that those groups can liaise with that slide I shared on those student pipeline activities, because so much of that content is now online, which enables that sharing of already delivered formats.
Thank you so much, everyone. This was very, very exciting.